This Film is Lit, the podcast where we finally settle the score on one simple question. Is the book really better than the movie? I'm Brian, and I have a film degree, so I watch the movie, but don't read the book.
And I'm Katie. I have an English degree, so I do things the right way and read the book before we watch the movie.
So prepare to be wowed by our expertise and charm as we dissect all of your favorite film adaptations and decide if the silver screen or the written word did it better. So turn it up, settle in, and get ready for spoilers, because this film is lit.
I am, thank the Lord, very cunning. Most girls are, though we're not given due credit for it. It's Catherine Called Birdy, and this film is lit.
Hello and welcome back to This Film is Lit, the podcast where we talk about movies that are based on books. This is Katie's birthday episode, so she got to do the intro. Also, it just makes more sense in your voice, because I am not a very cunning lady, as it turns out. We are doing Catherine Called Birdy today, Katie's birthday pick. We got a lot to talk about, more than I thought, so we're going to get right into it. If you have not read or watched Catherine Called Birdy, but you still want to listen to the episode, don't worry, you can. We're going to give a summary of both the book and the movie in Let Me Sum Up.
Let me explain. No, there is too much. Let me sum up.
All right, I sourced my book summary from Wikipedia with a couple edits. The story begins in September 1290 when Birdy describes her world, her father's manor, her father and mother themselves, and the people she encounters daily. The novel is marked by the Catholic saints' days. Catherine is called Birdy because she keeps many birds as pets. She has 3 older brothers. The eldest, Robert, is a knight. He weds his betrothed, though she is only 12, and she dies from complications while giving birth to their child. Her second brother, Thomas, is in the king's service. Edward, with whom she corresponds and is closest, is a monk who lives in an abbey nearby. Birdy's mother wishes for her to be an accomplished and docile lady, while her father wishes to make an advantageous social connection through her marriage. Several suitors approach Stonebridge Manor intending to woo Lady Catherine, but all fall victim to her clever pranks. Eventually, her father demands that she marry an old, repulsive man she calls Shaggy Beard. She spends the year describing in her diary, fighting the marriage, devising various escapes and alternate versions of her life where she will run away and be a monk or escape overseas and go on the Crusades. Her favorite uncle, George, comes home from the Crusades and falls in love with Birdy's best friend, Lady Alice. Because George does not have a high position in society, they cannot marry, and both end up wedding others. George, an eccentric older Saxon businesswoman named Ethelfritha, and Alice, a 7-year-old duke. Birdy begins to wonder about fate, love, and responsibility. As the day of Birdy's wedding approaches, she runs away to her uncle and aunt. She realizes that she will be the same no matter whom she marries, thus she allows her uncle to take her home. But when she arrives, she is confronted with the happy news that Shaggy Beard has died in a tavern brawl, and she's now engaged to his son, Stephen, who is clean, young, and educated. This match pleases her greatly, and she starts to dream about marrying him, counting down the days until she can see him.
All right, here's the summary for Catherine Called Birdy, no comma, the film, also sourced from Wikipedia. Catherine, known as Birdy, is a 14-year-old English woman living in 13th century Lincolnshire, and her father Rollo, with her father Rollo, her mother Aislinn, and 17-year-old brother Robert. Her other brother Edward is a monk at a nearby monastery. The headstrong and rambunctious Birdy is attended by her loyal servant Morwenna and is friends with a peasant boy named Perkin, who often joins her in her antics. The indulgent Rollo is informed that the family finances are in terrible shape and that he can solve them by wedding Birdy to a wealthy suitor. When Birdy starts her first period, Morwenna shows her how to deal with it, and Rollo begins seriously looking for suitors. Aislinn gives birth to a stillborn child, the latest of several such tragedies. Unwilling to grow up and lose her freedom, Birdie begins chasing off potential suitors through strange and off-putting antics. Birdie's friend Alice comes to stay with them. Handsome Uncle George, with whom Birdie is smitten, soon returns from the Crusades. Birdie discovers Alice and George kissing and breaks off her friendship with Alice. George breaks Alice's and Birdie's hearts by marrying Ethelfrith, a wealthy widow. Rollo announces that Aislinn is pregnant again, much to the anger of Birdie, who fears that her mother will die in childbirth. A new suitor, Sir Henry Murgaugh, arrives, and Birdie dubs him Shaggybeard for his unkempt appearance. Also, I thought his name was John.
Whatever. I thought it was too.
Wikipedia,
they call him Shaggybeard mostly.
True,
so.
But also Wikipedia notorious for we copy these from Wikipedia because it's just makes sense. It seems silly to write our own summary of a thing that is already summarized, but very often they are not like perfectly accurate. And Birdie dubs him Shaggybeard for his unkempt appearance. Birdie attempts to scare away the much older man, but Shaggybeard finds her antics alluring. Saying that he enjoys the chase, he gives Birdie a purse full of money, saying that she should spend it when she agrees to marry him. Alice's father marries her off to a 9-year-old boy, but her new husband soon dies. This pleases Robert, who is secretly in love with Alice and plans to ask her to marry him. Alice's father demands a higher bride price than Robert can afford. Dowry is what we call that around these parts. Maybe not back then, I don't remember, but maybe it was just called a bride price then. I don't know.
I have no idea.
Then Robert can afford. Birdie decides to give Shaggybeard's money to Robert so that he can marry Alice. Birdie runs off to her Uncle George's, where she learns that her romantic notions of George's adventures are false. Ethelfrith suggests that the two of them run off and have adventures together, but Birdie realizes that if she does so, she will miss her family and friends. Resolved to marry for the sake of the family, Birdie returns home to find her mother in labor. Complications arise, but Rollo helps talk Aislinn through the labor, and she gives birth to twin daughters. The day has finally arrived, and Birdie must say a tearful goodbye as she prepares to leave with Shaggybeard to become his bride. As the carriage trundles away, Rollo intervenes and says that Birdie will remain with them. Shaggybeard insists that she marry him, and the two men agree to a duel. Despite his poor swordsmanship, Rollo disarms Shaggybeard, who fakes a back injury in order to remove himself from the duel. The assembled people take Birdie out of the carriage, ending the marriage agreement. Birdie, who has been keeping a diary of these events, summarizes what she has learned and vows to preserve what freedom she can in her world. As she roughhouses with Perkin, a suitor approaches. The end. So that is a rough summary of Catherine Called Birdy, the film. I have a lot of questions. We don't have a Guess Who this week, I guess, right?
No.
Okay, so no Guess Who, but I do have a lot of questions, so we're going to get into those in Was That in the Book?
Nicholas Flamel is the only known maker of the Philosopher's Stone.
The what?
Honestly, don't you two read?
All right, so first up, and this is pretty early in, as one of the opening lines, maybe, of the film, and it's in the trailer, and so it stuck out to me, and because it was in the trailer, and it's a pretty prominent line in the film, I was thinking maybe this is like a well-known line from the book. It was also what we used for the opening intro on this episode, and I wanted to know if it came from the book, and that is, I am, thank the Lord, very cunning. Most girls are, though we're not given due credit for it. Can't do an accent, so I won't be. Katie, is that line from the book, that exact line?
That exact line is not from the book, but it is kind of a good summary of the overall vibe of the book.
I mean, I imagined that. I believed that was the case. Like, I assumed, that it was, that it definitely fell in line with the book, but not that exact line.
No,
Okay.
I did a bunch of keyword searches.
Okay.
Trying to see if I could even find anything similar.
Gotcha.
But I do not believe there is anything like that line in the book.
Okay. Speaking of the book, turns out in the film it's revealed that we are in fact reading, or not reading, but the voiceover we are hearing comes from a diary that Birdie is keeping. She's writing a novel about herself, and writing a diary, kind of telling her own story at the urging of Edward, her brother. And so that's the voiceover that we're hearing, and that is how we're being told this story. And I wanted to know if that element of the diary and like us reading her story came from the book.
Yes, the book is an epistolary novel.
Okay.
And it is written in diary format. So we are literally reading her diary.
That book. Gotcha. Is the whole thing that? Like,
yes.
Okay, there's no like...
No,
framing
there's no framing
like
or breaks from it. It's
okay.
literally her diary.
Okay, cool. So, as we mentioned in the summary, or as I mentioned in the summary, we kind of get to the inciting incident that kicks everything off. Is that we find out that Lord Rollo, Bertie's father, is in financial straits. He has wasted away all of his money, and he owes a bunch of money because he's a bit of an idiot and spends his money on ridiculous things. And I wanted to know if that was kind of the insight. And so he needs to marry her off to help pay the debts of his, lordship or whatever. And I wanted to know first if that element came from the book. And then second, my second question is, while we're finding out that he has all these financial issues, and his like aide or whatever suggests finding a suitor for Bertie so that she can marry and they can get money from it. Rollo like is talking about Bertie, and he calls her hideous and compares her to a leper. And that really took me off guard because that was not the dynamic of the relationship between. I was expecting some tension and issues between father and daughter, but that was not really like what I was expecting. So two-part question. First, did they owe a bunch of money? And two, or, are they in debt? And two, does he make a habit of calling his daughter hideous and comparing her to lepers?
So this is kind of the movie's first real, like, big change to the story. The book does not have a subplot where the family is broke and Bertie needs to make an advantageous match in order to save them. I didn't mind that per se, but I also didn't think it was a particularly necessary change, nor did I think it was a particularly creative one. Like, historically speaking, we don't need an explanation for Bertie's father wanting to marry her off. So to me, it ends up feeling a little bit like, oh, we need to explain this to our dumb modern audience because they're gonna need a reason for it.
Interesting. I didn't necessarily I didn't necessarily take it in that direction, that it was felt like a cheap thing to do because they were worried about modern audiences, so much as I thought maybe it's a slightly cheap thing to do because it ups the stakes a little more and makes Rollo's eventual sort of where his character ends up at the end of the story be more impactful, because there is this other factor weighing into it of the financial debt looming over them. The fact that he still goes through with not, marrying his daughter off to this guy. Although I think they keep his dowry, so I don't they? Because the guy says,
I've got thoughts on the ending later.
But because the guy says, I already gave you the dowry, and it seems like they just keep it. I don't know, whatever. We'll get to that later. But I think that was why I agree. It's not necessary because it's just when they turn 14, you marry them off to, or when they get their blood or whatever.
When they get to marrying age.
Yeah, you marry them off to the wealthiest suitor or whatever political expedient person comes along that you want to marry them off to. I agree. But I also don't think, especially in a post Game of Thrones world, I don't think I think audiences would. If they did do it because they were worried audiences wouldn't get that, I think they're severely underestimating audiences, which would be wild considering how many Game of Thrones actors are in this movie.
True.
Like they have to know that, the reason, obviously Game of Thrones is a fantasy setting, but a lot of the similar politics in the way that arranged marriages and stuff happen to carry over from that show. So anyways,
So to speak to Rollo himself, he's pretty different in the movie than his character in the book, and I have way more notes on that later, but for now we'll say his movie character is a little bit nicer. But I do think these early scenes are closest to the book depiction.
Okay.
Although I don't think at any point in the book he calls her hideous or compares her to a leper.
Yeah. And now I will say, just to give a little bit here, or caveat it a little bit, is that one of his kind of recurring character traits is that he's kind of like, he likes to joke, and he always says like it's a jest or whatever. Like he says ridiculous things, and I kind of thought that was an interesting idea, that there's this like sarcastic character at a time when like potentially that sort of sarcasm doesn't really. It seemed like that's what they were going for, is that he's this like dry, sarcastic guy who says stuff he doesn't really mean. But everybody takes it completely, like genuinely, and he has to repeatedly be like, "No, I'm joking." but that gets a little muddied in the fact that he also does just seem kind of like an asshole, like,
Yeah.
which is true of a lot of times of people like in modern times who kind of couch, saying shitty things in sarcasm and saying they're joking. So I think that maybe is what they're going for there, which I thought was a little bit interesting. So point being that in this instance, I don't think he's necessarily like being entirely sincere when he says like she's hideous and looks like a leper. Doesn't mean it's fine that he said it, but I think in his head he would say, "Well, I was joking," but
Right.
obviously it's a terrible joke.
Yeah.
It's not funny.
Yeah, like I said, I do have more stuff about him later, but overall I think his character just got like a little bit muddled.
Okay. Yeah, we have a lot. I had some notes about that too later. So.
Yeah.
So then eventually Birdie ends up getting her first period, and she does not realize what is happening. She's using the restroom and she finds some blood on her undergarments or whatever, and she rushes to Morwenna, who's like her lady maid, handmaid, whatever, and it's like, "I'm dying." And I wanted to know if that was a very, I feel like I've seen that. I was like, I've seen this in that's like a pretty common like joke for this kind of thing, especially for like period pieces where like medical knowledge was not as well found or well known. And so she's like, "I'm dying," and she's kind of does this whole very like melodramatic bit about how she's dying and must say goodbye to everybody. And then Morwen is like, "No, you're just having your period." Does that come from the book?
She actually doesn't get her period in the book.
Oh, okay.
And again, this was a change that I didn't mind, but did feel just a wee bit expected. Like it's fine, and I get it. But we aren't really doing anything new with our feminist historical fiction here.
No, definitely not. Yeah, like I said, I know I've seen that in at least a handful of other coming of age period pieces. So we're introduced to Perkin, who's her best friend, who's kind of a weird little kid, and they're out in the field playing together. And at this point, suitors have started arriving because Rollo has put out the call that he has a daughter of marrying age. And so suitors start showing up so that they can take her title. And the first one shows up is Russell Brand. And thank God he's only in this scene. As I mentioned in the prequel, I was worried how much he was going to be in this movie. He's literally only in this scene, which I was very grateful for.
Yeah, he's in like 3 minutes of this film.
Yeah. But it's a fun scene. In particular, there's a line, this is also in the trailer, but I thought it was very funny. It's delivered very well. But there's a handful of these moments that very distinctly felt like modern comedy to me. And this was one of those moments where they're like going on about how he's like, "I'm looking for the Lady Catherine," and Catherine herself is pretending not to be Catherine, and her and Perkins are kind of like putting the suitor on, and they're like, "Oh, she's really hideous," and blah blah blah, and they say that she has a third ear, and he's like, "A third ear? Where?" And Birdie says, "The back of the neck," and he's like, "Is it functional?" And she goes, "Spare." And that line got me. It's a very funny line. And I wanted to know if that came from the book, but I have a feeling it did not, because that felt, the spare part in particular, I was like, that's a writer's room comedy joke.
And you're correct. This specific exchange is not from the book. There is a similar scene where she runs off a potential suitor by pretending to be a villager and pretending and telling him that the Lady Catherine is ugly and crazy. But it does not include this exchange.
Yeah. I will say, I don't want to, it's going to sound like I'm being, like, I'm not actually particularly critical of the fact that some of this stuff feels like more modern, kind of like, you can tell it's like, this is more modern comedy. Because there's actually a lot of elements that I'll talk about here shortly that I think are really interesting about this movie that I think actually, at least in my uninformed opinion, nail some of the weird eccentricities of what I imagine the 1200s were like more than other things that depict that time period. And we'll get to some of that here in a minute. But a couple of these scenes, just feel particularly a little anachronistic, I guess, at least in their writing. So then we find out that George is coming to visit, Uncle George, and it is revealed that Birdie has a huge crush on her Uncle George. He is her favorite uncle, but more than her favorite uncle, she is in love with him. And I wanted to know if that aspect came from the book, but then eventually it's revealed that George and Alice, and I always have to remind myself it's Alice because it's spelled in old timey language. It's Aelis, which I assume is where Alice comes from, probably, but it looks like A-list or something. But anyways, Alice, who is one of her other best friends, along with Perkin, Alice and George end up kind of having a little fling, and she sees them kissing, and she gets very jealous of them when they hit it off. And I want to know if all that dynamic came from the book.
Yes, this is one of the more book accurate subplots of the story. I had forgotten about this part of the book. I think my note literally read, "Oh no, she has a crush on her uncle."
Yeah. There's a great line in the movie, and I actually meant to ask if this came from the book, where her and Alice are talking about it, and she's like, and Birdie's like, "Oh, if only he were my cousin, because then she could marry him, but she can't marry her uncle, but she could marry him if he was her cousin."
Though that does not come from the book. But Uncle George and Alice do have a brief romantic flirtation, followed by some pining when they can't get married. More pining on his end than hers. But
okay. But yeah, so that whole thing does.
Yes.
That I assumed that would seem like a fairly strange thing to add. Obviously seems very, again, as is one of those things that felt very accurate to me. And that's the other thing. This movie doesn't really sugarcoat the weirdness of the sexual dynamics and politics of 1200s England or whatever. Like it doesn't like try to necessarily like modernize or it doesn't try to like smooth over the weirdness of the sexual dynamics of this time period for modern audiences. It's like, yeah, she has a crush on her uncle, and it's like nobody thinks it's that weird. Yeah. Like it doesn't seem like anybody thinks it's particularly that weird. And you know, and like the age thing is never like, obviously to modern audiences, like she's 14 at one point. Alice ends up marrying a 9-year-old, and like it's all very weird. But it's, you know, and obviously terrible. But it's like the movie is not trying to like, this is like, yeah, that's how that shit was back then. Like we just kind of deal with that on its face, which I thought was interesting. It does comment on it here and there, maybe in ways that are obviously not, that are a little anachronistic. There are some jokes and stuff about the age discrepancies and stuff, but it is.
The book is kind of similar. And you know, the idea about like getting married super young in the Middle Ages, I think does get a little bit exaggerated by media.
Right.
Which, you know, and it's complicated, and I'm not a historian. No. But my general understanding of it was that the higher you go up in the social strata, the more likely you were to maybe get married a little bit younger.
Yes, because for very political reasons.
Yes, for political reasons. But then often, like, the marriages were not consummated until they were of age. And
which people, of age still being pretty young, but yeah.
Right, still being pretty young, but also, like, if you went too far outside of like the boundaries of that, people did still think it was like weird and wrong. Yes. Yeah. And it's complex.
Yeah, it is. And that is a good point. It is not as maybe as sort of there were like moral standards and stuff, and there were like, you know, they weren't like a 15-year-old marrying a 9-year-old was not like a normal thing that people were just like, yeah. Everybody just marries 9-year-olds, whatever. Like that's, you know, and that is a fair point, that it is. Those are like usually very specific scenarios where it's like political things, and they're not consummating said marriage at 9 and 12 or whatever. But I thought it was just I enjoyed the fact that the movie didn't like try to like get rid of that stuff.
Yeah, and I just want to acknowledge that it is like more complex. Because this idea that like, oh, everybody married young back then is sometimes utilized by nefarious characters within modern times.
Oh, yeah.
So I did want to bring that up, that's maybe like not quite as common as media makes it seem, or as like conversations surrounding that idea make it seem like, especially if you were just a normal non-noble person. Like the average age of marriage was late teens, early 20s. Yeah. Like you know, most people, a little younger than what we're used to now, but like pretty normal.
Yeah. That's fair. So then we get in the movie, a string of suitors come to call, and Birdie is sabotaging all of these suitors' advances. And we get this whole string kind of in montage in the film of Birdie and the different ways she sabotages these meetings. And I wanted to know if this all came from the book, because I was like, man, her parents are terrible at this. They do not like, if you really want to marry your daughter off to one of these tutors, you got to figure out a better system than like having her come in and just do whatever she wants in front of them for an hour and then leave. Like, it's just very strange to me.
Birdie running off suitors is a recurring plot thread throughout the book, although I think the movie does it a bit more.
It makes for fun gags.
Yeah, the movie kind of like bulks that up a little bit and beefs it out. But it is a recurring plot thread that runs through the book. Her parents are also far worse at it in the movie. Like, why would they let her perform a song?
I was like, what did you think was going to happen here?
They're having dinner with this one suitor, and her mom's like, "Oh, she's going to perform a song for you of her own composition." And I'm like, "Lady, what do you think?
What do you think is about to happen?"
It's not
here? Like, again, because at this point in the film, we've seen a montage of her sabotaging several suitors.
Yes,
like, you think all of a sudden she's gonna come in and sing like a wonderful dulcet like
a sweet little love song or something. No.
Yeah, parents are a little dumb, but it's fine. So then during one of the suitors' dinners, that she actually starts to kind of hit it off. And I believe this is when she says she wants to start trying, maybe? I can't remember.
I think you're right, because she hits a point where she's like, okay, I'm going to try to do what my parents want me to do.
Yeah. She's like, the rest of this isn't working. Let me try. Yeah, let me try like being the model daughter and like suitor or whatever.
And so this particular suitor is like closer to her age.
Yeah, and they kind of hit it off for a second. Like they have a little bit of a conversation where they seem to kind of be getting along. But then Rollo announces that Aislinn, Birdie's mom, is pregnant again. And this sets Birdie off, and she gets very upset, and she kind of blows up on her dad in front of all their guests and everything. Because her mom has had a half dozen miscarriages at this point or something like that. And apparently the midwives or whatever on the last one said that it's very likely she won't survive another one or something like that. And so Birdie's like, are you literally trying to kill my mom? Like, what are you doing? Why would you do this? Why, blah, blah, blah. Very understandably, like a very, and the movie paints it as such, like a very sympathetic, understanding outburst. And I wanted to know if that came from the book, because I thought that was a very interesting. I liked that scene a lot.
The scene is not from the book, although Birdie does frequently express concern and distress that her mother could die trying to give birth.
Yeah.
And we have a similar setup to it where her mom has had like 5 or 6 miscarriages. And the midwives have said, like, if you have another one, that's probably going to take you too.
Yeah.
But I did like the scene in the movie, and I thought it made a lot of sense to kind of more concretely tie her mom's situation to Birdie's anxiety about getting married.
Yeah, because that is a big aspect of Birdie's kind of anxiety about marriage in the film, is her anxiety about birth, like giving birth. She knows if she gets married, she's going to have kids. And she's seen what her mom has gone through with that, and the potential outcomes, and it weighs on her a lot. So I thought that was a really well done scene. And I believe this is the same scene.
Yes.
Is that after she storms out, her Rollo and tries to cover, and he's like, oh, she's just not feeling well. I think there's a little bit of pox going around, and the guests are like, pox. They're like, let's get out of here. And then we get this kind of very, again, this maybe of any scene was the most.
Yes.
Like, this is a modern comedy scene, because they're like, oh, it's a pox. Oh, no, I don't. And they're like, it's like, you can tell it's like, I don't think they're riffing necessarily, but the delivery of it I felt like I was watching The Office or something. Like, and again, not necessarily in a bad way.
It's giving Who's On First.
It's just like, not necessarily in a bad way, but it's just, and they're riffing, and he's like, oh, pox, oh, it's not, no, don't leave, it's not a big pox, it's a small pox. It's just, and then that's the joke, obviously, for modern audiences, is it's smallpox. They're like, oh, it's a smallpox, just a small, blah, blah, blah. And I wanted to know if that scene came from the book, because that one, again, if any of these scenes in this movie, if you had to have me put money down, was this from the book, or is this a 2022 written a scene, I would say, oh yeah, this was written in the last 3 years.
Yeah, this is absolutely not from the book, but I think you hit the nail right on the head in your assessment of it. I don't know if that joke even works in the Middle Ages.
No, I don't think it does.
I don't think it does.
They wouldn't know what smallpox.
Yeah,
I don't think Again, I don't know when smallpox.
I don't either. But I mean, again, I'm not a historian, but I associate smallpox with a later.
Well, and so the joke, like they may have called something like a smallpox, and that may be where the term, like where smallpox comes from eventually,
right?
Like
Possibly.
what we call smallpox, but they would not have called the same thing smallpox that we modernly refer to as smallpox. And so the joke for the audience watching is that they're saying this thing that is a reference to this other thing that is not a thing yet in their time. I actually, like, the thing that's funny is that I actually don't know. I think it might be reasonable that they would say that like people from that time period would be like, oh, it's just a smallpox. Like that, though, those words may not be like completely out of place to say, but there wouldn't be the added like layer of comedy to it, obviously, because they probably had smallpox, but I don't know the history.
I don't know the history of smallpox. I just know that, like, from my knowledge of history, I associate it with a later time period.
Yeah, and for sure they would not have known and called. And it's clear in that scene because they're not referring to smallpox.
Yes,
he says smallpox, and they're not like, oh my god, not that smallpox. They're not referring to the concept of smallpox. They're referring to a smallpox, which, whatever. I think it's a fun scene. It's just very clearly like, and again, more so even than like obviously it's like a modern reference for modern audiences, but even beyond that, it's just the delivery of it all is so. It's like such a modern comedy delivery that I couldn't, and the way it escalates, the way the like bit builds, it's just like, oh yeah, okay. And again, to contrast that to a lot of stuff in this movie to me that felt like, and I'll talk about it here in just a second, that I felt like felt more period accurate types of comedy and stuff, and like the stuff they would find. I don't know. I just think, that scene really stood out to me. So she then runs, I think this is the same scene, continuation, where she runs out and she's kind of wandering through the village and she stumbles across this young man who is selling mittens.
This is later.
Oh, maybe
okay. This is later.
Oh, this is Halloween.
No, it's George's wedding, I think.
Okay. Yeah. At some point she's out and she's wandering around town and she stumbles into this guy who is, I think you're right, who is selling mittens from a cart. And they're kind of talking and chit-chatting, and the guy, the young man, says like, oh, I'll give you a pair of mittens for a kiss or something, and she says she's never had a kiss, and whatever, it plays out, he gives her a kiss, and it's her first kiss, and I wanted to know if she gets her first kiss from a mitten man in the book.
No, she does not. She gets her first kiss from Perkin in the book. Eventually, like much later in the book, and in a friend way, not in like a romantic way.
Yeah.
But I preferred the movie's version.
Yeah, I thought it was.
I liked the mysterious dashing mitten man.
Dashing mitten man who just shows up and he's selling mittens and he disappears. I also loved, and I assume this is a historically accurate bit, that they're like 3-finger mittens.
I think that? I think that is historically accurate.
I don't know why they would have done that if it wasn't, but yeah, they look like
claws, like,
yeah, there's some character that, but they're like 3-fingered mittens, which was interesting. So then at George's wedding to Ethelfritha, or whatever her name is, they're having the ceremony afterwards, or the reception basically afterwards, and she's sitting at the head table and she ends up kind of having a conversation with Ethelfritha, and it's very clear during the ceremony and everything that her and George are not, or that George, at least in the ceremony, we're introduced to her and she seems very eager to marry George, but George is not, very clearly not into this. He's just marrying her for political / financial reasons, or I think primarily financial reasons.
Yeah.
We find out she's very wealthy because she's a widow.
Yes.
And but during this dinner scene, Birdy has a conversation with Ethelfritha, and it's revealed that she also doesn't really care. Like she's very much aware that George is not in love with her, and she's not particularly, like, she likes George, but that she's not particularly like in love with him necessarily. And she kind of gives this very real world, real talk life lesson to Birdy about like marriage and everything. And I thought that scene was really interesting, and I wanted to know if it came from the book.
So the parts of this are from the book. A lot of what Ethelfrith says to her comes from the book, but it happens with a different character. So Bertie in the book gets the chance to meet Madame Joanna, who's the king's cousin. And at first she's disappointed because Madame Joanna is a very elderly old woman and not a glamorous princess. But they have a nice chat about, like, again, some similar things to what Ethelfrith says to her. And Bertie comes away from that feeling, like, hopeful.
Yeah. And for people who haven't read or watched, essentially Ethelfrith's kind of, their conversation kind of boils down to her saying, like, look, this is an arrangement for, he gets money. It's like a mutually beneficial arrangement. Obviously we're not marrying for love, but there was other reasons to do it. And I can't remember the whole context of the conversation, but that, like she ends up, Ethelfrith ends up getting, kind of like, I don't know if protection is the right word, but just something along those lines. Like she has like a... Yeah,
she says like mainly what George is providing for her is protection.
Yeah, and like gives her, because she's like a wealthy widow. And so now she has this, strapping guy who can kind of help protect her finances and stuff like that. And they get companionship, and that's, they like each other. And I thought their whole relationship was really interesting in the movie. But anyways, I like that scene a lot. And so it is from the book, kind of just
a little bit different. But I did think that change made a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Especially because this Madame Joanna, we meet her once and we never interact with her again.
Yeah.
So I think you might as well take the essence of that scene and just give it to a more relevant character that we are going to interact with again.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. So then Alice, who is Bertie's friend, who was originally, her and George were kind of smitten in together and were potentially going to be wedded. But then that didn't work out because Alice ends up getting married off to a 9-year-old from some other, I don't know.
He's like a duke or something.
A duke from somewhere.
So like she marries up.
Yes. Her father marries her off to this 9-year-old. And we meet the 9-year-old briefly at this wedding, but then at George's wedding. But then we find out very shortly thereafter that the 9-year-old died of a fever.
Yeah.
And Bertie makes a joke about how because at the wedding he's like, when we're introduced to him, he like shows Bertie, he has like this radish head doll. He's like, this is my doll. And they're like, oh great. And then when after they find out that he died of the fever, Bertie's like, I wonder if they buried his radish head doll with them, which I was like, good Lord. And her mom begrudgingly laughs at this joke. And I wanted to know if any of that came from the book.
Worse. In the book, she's actually wedded to a 7-year-old.
I think at this point, when 9 or 7, I mean, you could say worse, but I guess we're splitting hairs here.
I guess. But he does eventually get sick and die. I do not recall any jokes about burying him with his doll.
Yeah, I will say that was one that, even though that was a joke that felt to me like it could be of the time period, because I think that's another thing that people, and I'll get into it here in just a second, or actually it's my next note, is that I wanted to know if any of this came from the book. Is that there's like this movie does a fairly good job, I think, of kind of showing the debauchery and the childishness of people from this time period. I think in modern times we like to romanticize, and I guess romanticize is the right term, people from the Middle Ages, as they were all, especially nobles and stuff, that they were all these like very proper and like sophisticated people, even like we simultaneously realized they were very like ignorant of a lot of things, but like, they had this like kind of class and sophistication about them because they were nobles and blah blah. But if anything you ever read about people from this time period, they're all fucking delinquents, like everything down to the every last one of them. Arguably, it seems like more so than modern time. Like,
they were all drunk all the time.
Yes, they were all drunk all the time.
You couldn't drink the water.
Yeah, they were all drunk all the time. They're, and even that's a little bit of an overstatement. But point being that because yes, you couldn't drink the water, but the stuff they were drinking, they weren't drinking
they weren't drinking
like 15% ABV wine.
No,
they were drinking very mild, But point being, off that being said, they were still very drunk very often, a lot of the time, more so than modern people are. But we like to imagine them, again, as more sophisticated than they were. And I think this movie does a good job, at least from my understanding historically, of kind of portraying, again, the debauchery and childishness of people from this time period. Like they do this Christmas pageant at the at one point at the Lord's estate, and like people are like riffing it, and like there's like it's just very silly. Like they're not treating you would imagine I think you would like a lot of people in modern time, a lot of modern people would assume that if you were doing like a Christmas pageant in the 1200s, it would be very holy and
very holy, very reverent.
Yes.
Because we do think of that time period as being like so religious.
Right.
And like it was.
It was, but also they were a bunch of drunk weirdos who just like, fart jokes and stuff. So like, yeah, it was like, yeah. So like the Christmas pageant like kind of goes off the rails, and like Birdie like heckles at one point and everybody's laughing about it. And it's like this whole, and that felt really real to me. Again, from what I understand of the time period. And then when we're introduced to Shaggy Beard. He like at this, I think it's at the Christmas party or whatever. He like gets really drunk and he's like storming around and he just like farts in front of everybody. And then he's like, I'm the 7th richest man. I want to fornicate. And he's just like yelling and everybody's like laughing and doesn't care. And it all felt really accurate to me. And I wanted to know if the book had that same sense of like realistic debauchery and childishness of like all of the people involved in the story.
Honestly, I would say that the book goes even harder on this aspect than the movie does. It is constantly ridiculous, constantly disgusting in the best way. And that was a huge part of what I liked about it as a kid, is that it felt like this very real depiction of this time period that I was used to seeing depicted in a completely different way.
Yeah, no, for sure. Because yeah, like you said, or like we were saying, it's if you're kind of just culturally, the cultural understanding of this time period, you would not kind of expect that. And then so going in and reading that, I think, especially as a child, would be it would like take you aback and be like, wait, what is going on here? It'd be very interesting. But again, from my understanding, it's probably much more historically accurate than our cultural understanding of, again, the very more like sophisticated, reserved, reverent time period. No, it was fucking weirdos. It's one of those things where something like Monty Python and the Holy Grail is honestly probably more historically accurate in some ways than some other more serious, like,
lots of fart jokes.
Yeah. But speaking of Shaggy Beard, we're introduced to John Murgaugh here. I think his name may be John Henry Murgaugh or something like that. But he's just this ridiculous beast of a man. And so she doesn't want to be with him because he's really like gross and weird, and he's very old, like compared to her. He seems to be, in his 60s, 70s or something like that. And so he's very off-putting. And very kind of crude, as we mentioned, his introduction is him like farting in front of everybody and like just like, I want to fornicate. He's this very rude guy. And I wanted to know if, and then so she tries to put him off when he's like one of the suitors. She tries to do some of her antics because she's like, I can't marry this guy. This guy's the worst. And so she tries to do some of her antics that have worked to like dissuade other suitors. And she like gets up on the dinner table and starts like growling and being weird, and he's like into it. He's like, nice, I like weird people. And she's like, wait a second, what? And I wanted to know if John Murgaugh's or if Shaggy Beard's characterization from movie to book is similar, and two, if that specific scene where she tries to sabotage it, but surprise, he's into that. It's like that thing, it's a surprise, that's my fetish. It's like if that's the reveal we get with him from the book.
Okay, so Shaggy Beard is from the book, and he does fill the same role of Birdie's unwanted fiance. He is depicted as old and quite disgusting. However, we interact with him a lot more in the movie than we do in the book. In the book, Birdie meets him once, which is at Robert's wedding, and the movie replaces that with Uncle George's wedding, or possibly Christmas.
I think it's
don't remember.
It might be George's wedding.
But anyway, moving that was a choice that I did like. But following that first meeting, Shaggy Beard never actually appears in the text again. And he functions more like a boogeyman.
Oh,
that she's like constantly worried about having to see him again. I have some mixed feelings on this change. On the one hand, I understand the movie wanting to utilize the character more. I think that makes sense. and Paul Kaye does a great job.
Yeah, I would agree. Paul Kaye, the guy who plays him, most people would recognize him. He's Thoros of Myr in Game of Thrones. This is where I recognized him from. He's like one of the fire sword guys.
Yeah.
He's the guy that brings the other fire sword guy back to life over and over again, I'm pretty sure. Because they're part of that religion, the flame religion or whatever. And when the other guy who has like the eye patch or whatever keeps getting killed, he's the one who brings him. And he's drunk all the time. He's like an alcoholic in Game of Thrones. But anyways, it's that actor. He's also in other stuff, but that's what I knew him from. And yeah, I thought he was great. I thought he did everybody was great in this movie.
Yeah, no, it was a pretty well acted film. On the other hand, the other half of my feelings, that scene where she's on the table screaming and oinking at him and he's like into it.
Yeah.
It's not from the book. And I get what the movie's doing and like it is gross. And he's gross, but it also kind of makes it seem like it would work out.
I got that similar thing of being like, wait, what are we doing here? Because like, wait, okay, so maybe they are kind of compatible in a weird way.
Yeah, like he doesn't even mind that she's a weirdo.
Yeah,
like I get what I think the movie is trying to do, and I don't even think the movie fails. But in my opinion, it does get a little bit muddled. Like, I'm not sure if the movie just wants us to be grossed out or if the movie also kind of wants us to think that, like, maybe it would be okay.
I think it just wants us to think to be grossed out, but I agree that there is a part of me during that scene that was like, oh, maybe that could work. Maybe he's because, and I think the thing that makes I think the thing that's tough about that scene is that if what she was doing in that scene by getting up on the table and being a weirdo was like completely out of character for her, and then he responded by liking it, we would go, oh, gross. Like, this is weird. That won't work. But we know her.
Like, it's in character.
We know she's kind of a weirdo.
Yeah.
So, like, maybe?
So, like, it kind of, kind of makes it seem like, oh, it wouldn't be ideal being married to this gross old man, but, like, she could go live in wealth and comfort and also get up on the table and oink.
Yeah, and he'd be like, I don't know.
He'd be like, that's my wife.
I agree. It is a little strange. Yeah, it does. I think, I completely agree that I think it works okay, but it's a little mixed because we know that, you're left thinking like, well, maybe that would kind of work in a weird way. I don't want it to, but like, maybe.
But like, what are we saying here?
Yeah, no, I agree. So then my next question is, then she finds out, she knows she has to marry Shaggy Beard, and she's very upset about this. So she instead decides, I think she's at this point has been able to proposition or convince her dad to let her wait to marry him until her mom has birth or gives birth to the baby. And so in the intervening time, she runs off and she finds Perkin, and she's like, look, we have to get married because I don't want to marry this Shaggy Beard guy, so we need to get married. And he's like, no, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
And his first initial kind of rebuke is, I don't want to marry you. I don't, do you even think about what I want and that sort of thing? Because that is a fair point. And I like that kind of dynamic of she's never really seen him as a romantic partner until this point, and now it's just like an escape hatch, and he's like, why would I don't just want to be your escape hatch marriage, like what are you talking about? But then the movie takes it a little bit further, and he's like, I don't really want to marry any woman, and she's like, oh, and hugs him. And I wanted to know if Perkin was gay in the book, because Perkin is gay in the movie.
To me, that was not indicated anywhere in the text of the book.
Okay.
It's not indicated, like, we never see him have an interest in a woman in the book, so I guess you could read it however you wanted.
Yeah.
But the movie was kind of very clear about that. They didn't really do anything with it, but...
no, I mean, well, we see him kind of with a boy at the end.
Yeah, I guess.
Like, she looks out the window at the very end of the movie, and he's, like, sitting in a cart, like, talking to another boy. I mean, who knows? But, like, the implication being, like, oh, maybe they're gonna, Because she sees Morwenna with Golden Tiger or whatever, and then she looks over and sees Perkin with this boy. They're not doing anything, but they're, like, sitting near each other together in this cart.
Yeah.
And so it's,
Although, I will say, for the time period... it feels like a good solution for both of them.
Yeah, that is true.
I'm just saying.
Yeah. Yeah, he would be. Yeah, that seems like a good. Although she couldn't because he doesn't have money. Like
Right.
Like the whole point, her father just wouldn't let her marry him because the whole point is that they need money. And Perkin the goat herder is not, I don't think, particularly wealthy.
Well, I think her idea was that they were gonna elope and like run away together.
Fair enough. She could have just run away regardless.
Yeah.
If she was gonna do that, but yeah. So then we get this big scene where where Birdie is going. She finds out that George is in love with Alice. Alice's husband has died.
Robert.
Sorry, Robert. Robert is in love with Alice. Robert is her other brother who lives at the estate with her. And we find out, it is revealed to Birdie. We've kind of known from the beginning because there's a scene earlier where it's clear that he's like smitten with Alice. But it's revealed to Birdie in this scene, or she finally realizes that Robert is in love with Alice. And once he finds out that her husband has died, her 9-year-old husband has died, he wants to marry her. She's going to let him use... He doesn't have enough money. They don't have enough money for the dowry for Alice, but he's going to... Or no, this is before that.
Yes.
She goes to Alice's to be like, hey, you should come marry Robert. He loves you, blah, blah, blah. But when they get there, Alice's dad is like, you don't have enough money. This is not... She's worth more than what you're, what your estate is offering or whatever. And Birdie gets this big moment, which is also from the trailer, where she has her big speech and where she gets to stand up. She gets to stand up to Walder Frey and be like, you don't get to decide where we go or who we are or how much we cost like we're things. We're not things, we're people. We can think and we can hear and we can feel. And I wanted to know if that specific kind of section of dialogue came from the book, because it's kind of one of the big climactic moments of the film, of Birdie getting to like do her soapbox feminism kind of thing. And I just want to know if that came from the book.
The scene is not from the book, nor is that line. I did generally like this scene. It is, like you kind of alluded to, a little bit feminism 101, but that's okay.
Yeah.
Acting is strong, and I think it does make sense coming from this particular character, who I would expect to be at a feminism 101 level.
Yeah, because that was my note on that scene. I was like, as I was watching the scene, I was like, it's a little like, okay. But again, it's a 14-year-old girl in the 1200s. Her feminist writings are not going to exactly be like third wave, like
they're not going to be 2022
intersectional, big concept feminism. It is very basic stuff, but yeah, coming from a teenage girl in the 1200s, it feels perfectly natural and kind of like a big moment, big statement for her, because at its time it would have been absolutely revolutionary gender politics to say something like that. So yeah, I think it works. And again, I think more than anything, it works because it's really well acted. I think Bella Ramsey does great with the scene. And so yeah, I thought the scene worked. I liked it, despite it being a little feminism 101, little like kind of like easy, like cliche.
A little bit easy, a little bit cliche. And I do want to note here that we do still need stuff like that.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
There's still people who need entry point feminism.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's a whole side episode about the Barbie movie. Maybe we'll never record one day, but I don't even want to put it out there. But yeah, about that very topic. That absolutely. There is a need for kind of more basic concept, entry point feminism, especially because this movie is definitely for. The movie is for like young adults, regardless of gender, but specifically for young women. And so, I think having it be a kind of a good entry point level and like it is like, it's a big girl boss moment, but I think it's fine. Like it's this doesn't have to be Judith. It's not Judith Butler.
Are you sure you're not thinking of Judith Butler?
Maybe I am thinking of Judith Butler. I was thinking of somebody who was Octavia's. The other Butler I was thinking of was Octavia Butler, who is an American sci-fi author she writes primarily, or wrote, I think she's still alive. Let me look real quick. No, she did pass away in 2006. Octavia Butler wrote science fiction primarily, concerned that had a strong themes of intersectional, like racism, feminism, class struggle, like lots of different progressive kind of intersectional stuff. That's where my head was going. There's another Butler. Why am I thinking of another Butler? So that's what was going on. My apologies to both Judith Butler and Octavia Butler. Side point, if I did refer to Judith Butler as she or her, they're actually non-binary. Our bad on that. We weren't aware at the time. Yeah, maybe I'm thinking of Judith Butler. It doesn't have to be Judith Butler. Name a woman challenge, impossible. Name a feminist scholar challenge, 2023. I fail. No, I mean, I know Judith Butler is one, but I don't think that's who I was thinking of. Point being, this doesn't have to be like a super intersectional, like deep modern treatise on feminism. It can just be, hey, we're not objects. Fuck you. Like, that's fine for what this is, because this movie is for like 12-year-old girls. Like girls, it's fine. Like it's okay.
We all need an entry point.
Yeah. So then my next question, and I have a lot here because this was interesting. Initially I had a note. I guess I'll start with my initial note, is that I had a note in my odds and ends that is like, I'm not sure that Andrew Scott, who plays Rollo, her Birdie's father in this, I'm not sure if his energy works for this role. Because throughout so much of the film, I kept wanting to like him. I kept expecting to like him. And for so much of the movie, he just seems awful.
Yeah.
And like, he has like comic moments that are like funny. But again, that was almost part of what I was like, I don't know if his energy works, because like the movie's trying to get me sympathetic with like how he's kind of funny. And it's Andrew Scott playing this character, and I want to like him. But like, and I thought his performance was really good and his character's interesting, but I just wanted to like him, and I couldn't because he's just awful for so much of the movie. And I was like, well, maybe they're not going to redeem him. I thought like they were, because what I was expecting coming into this movie is he's going to have his issues, but there's going to be like redeeming aspects of his character that ultimately shine through. And he gets kind of redeemed, for lack of a better term, and it's revealed that he's not kind of as bad as he is, which is what happens. But the thing that was weird about it to me is that he didn't have those. I wasn't seeing, at least, those hidden like good aspects of his character for most of the movie. And then all of a sudden he just kind of seems to be a pretty good guy, because then, and that was my question here, I was like, oh, maybe I'm wrong about Rollo, because he does show up at the end when this is after she runs off to George's and then comes back, and her mom is giving birth, and her mom is really struggling, and they're basically like, you're not gonna give birth, we're gonna have to you're gonna have another miscarriage, basically, or stillbirth or whatever. And but then Rollo comes in and he gives this really like endearing, heartfelt, beautiful speech to Aislinn as she's in labor, and Birdie is there watching, and it's a really like heartbreaking and beautiful scene, and I thought it was genuinely sweet and really riveting, and the performances are all great, but like he's like he I don't remember exactly what he says, but he has like some, I was like, those are good words, dude. Good words in this moment. But it kind of felt out of nowhere, which I thought was really interesting, because I liked aspects of his character up to this, but the only aspects of his character I liked up until this scene was that he was kind of like funny. Like he was like a sarcastic asshole, which like there's a likability to that, but what I wasn't seeing was like the tenderness for his daughter, like hiding under the surface, which I thought was strange, but also interesting. I don't know. I had a very mixed feelings about Rollo. And again, I think that was also complicated by the fact that it's played by Andrew Scott, who is like, from different stuff I've seen, I have kind of anticipation of like what I think his character is going to be like and how he plays characters and stuff. So I wanted to know, my question is, Rollo, book to movie, how are the character compare? We talked about this a little bit earlier. And then specifically, is the scene where he comes in and kind of like helps Aislinn through her labor, does that specific scene come from the book? Sorry, go.
Okay, so first, the labor scene is something that happens in the book. We just don't see it like we do in the movie. So I'm going to read a quote from the book. "My mother worsened, and we sent for Father Hugh to ease her dying. And then my father came home. He threw Father Hugh down the stairs, opened the window in the solar, cast all of us out, and stayed there with her, pacing and whispering and shouting until dark. He came out then, face gray but eyes shining, to say that she lives, and will live. I thank you, God, and the Virgin Mary, and my father, the most unlikely agent of a miracle that I know. I think he just battled the devil and won.
That one specific line is in the movie. My father, the most unlikely agent of a miracle that I know.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And I really did like this scene in the movie. I like that we got to see it. I thought it was very sweet, and that it made a lot of sense to show it, considering that the direction that the movie takes with Rollo and his relationship with his family, especially Birdie, and also his character arc. But that direction and depiction are fairly different from what appears in the book. He's a little bit one-dimensional, kind of, in the book. Rollo is a former knight. He's kind of an uncouth brute, greedy, but he's shrewd, and he's at least somewhat intelligent. His interactions with Birdie in general aren't great, but we can see his positive traits kind of in the background of her narration of her life. He's devoted to his wife.
That is the only redeeming quality
yeah.
in the movie that we see. You can tell he really does love Aislinn.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, he's devoted to her. And in regard to like money management and that kind of thing, it seems to be the opposite of the film.
Okay.
The household and the village both seem to have more than enough to go around. And there are multiple instances in the book where like a cottage or another structure in the village burns down, and then they're immediately building a new one like the next day. So he and Birdie don't get along, but it does seem like he takes pretty good care of the people he's responsible for. Birdie does come to realize that maybe he's not as awful as he seems, but it's more subtle and a little less on the nose than what the movie does.
The movie tries for that, and I think it mostly succeeds.
Yeah.
I think the biggest complaint I have is that he just doesn't quite, I needed one more early moment in the film of compassion for his daughter that I felt like was missing. Like, I think that was the only thing, because I agree. I think the movie does a great job showcasing, like, I love the scene where she stumbles in and they're like having sex in the morning, and then like he kisses her, and it's like very clear that he's very smitten with his wife and all that sort of stuff and cares about her deeply. And I like his character. I thought was interesting. And I think there needed to be, and I think towards the end, even before his big change, like the big end kind of thing, which we'll talk about here in a second, and even right before this labor scene, I think we get like one little scene where we kind of see some of his feelings and, like, you know, the fact that he does actually care for his daughter. I think the movie needed like one little element of that a little bit earlier to make me see that it was somewhere there. Yeah. Because it just felt like there was not, like, it felt like he really did not care about his daughter at all until like all of a sudden he did towards the end. I guess was maybe my only complaint, but anyways.
Yeah, well, I mean, and I think that's kind of one of the advantages that the book has over the movie, is that we're getting all of this like filtered, kind of extra filtered through Birdie's perspective, because it is her diary.
Yeah.
And we know that it is like very specifically her perspective and the way that she sees things and the way that she perceives her father, which I think is what the movie is trying to do at the beginning.
Yeah.
But it doesn't quite work the same way.
Yeah, I would agree.
Because we're not getting that same like, oh, I'm reading your diary feel.
We're regardless of the fact that the movie still does the voiceover and we know this is like a diary of events, when you're seeing this from the perspective of a movie, from this third person removed perspective, it feels like a more neutral account of things than I think is maybe what the movie was going for potentially. Because he just for the most part seems awful, pretty much. Other than in relation to Birdie, he seems pretty much awful until he's just kind of not all of a sudden. Yeah, and that was, I think, my biggest complaint. towards the end is that it felt a little sudden and easy.
Yeah, no, and I do think
Like his
Andrew
redemption or
Scott did a
whatever.
good job, but I
Yeah.
agree with you that his redemption at the end felt a little easy. I also wasn't sure why he always seemed to be in his pajamas.
That I loved. That I thought made sense. I totally felt like the idea of this kind of drunken, just like lord who just lounges around and doesn't really care to get dressed for anything because why? Who cares? Like I thought that made perfect sense that he's just kind of wandering around in like his robes all the time. I thought totally fit his character and like his characterization in the movie. I thought that was a fun detail personally.
Fair enough.
But then his big redemption moment with Birdie happens at the end of the film. And so I'm going to ask all three of the. I have three questions here. I'm going to ask all these together because you're going to answer them all together. First, I want to know if one, does he in the film he ends up tracking that she rides off in the. Sorry, let me back up. Shaggy Beard shows up to take Birdie away to marry her. She gets in everybody says goodbye to her. She gets in the cart and rides off with Shaggy Beard. But then Rollo, who is feeling very not thrilled with all of this, decides not going to do it. He rushes off to go get her, stops the cart, and essentially challenges Shaggy Beard to a duel. Or no, he doesn't challenge him to a duel. He says, "Hey, you can't take her. We're taking Catherine back with us." And Shaggy Beard is like, no, we're going to duel about it. So they're going to have a duel. One, I want to know if they duel. Two, I want to know if this specific exchange comes from the book because it's fantastic. This is Lord Rollo's big big tongue lashing moment. When he stops the cart, he says to Shaggy Beard, "I would burn in hell for allowing my daughter to spend her life with a man as rank and uniformly uncompelling as yourself. She would die of boredom, and furthermore, you resemble a bear who has attempted union with our local locksmith. It cannot be." Which is a great line. In particular, the with a man as rank and uniformly uncompelling as yourself. Uniformly uncompelling is a great insult. I wanted to know, so that is my second part. Did any of that dialogue come from the book? And then thirdly, during the duel, we have established in the film that Rollo is not a particularly good swordsman. He's been training, but he's not good at it. Doesn't care much for swordplay. So we're worried that he's not going to be able to handle this duel very well. But he does get cut, but he does manage to end up disarming Shaggy Beard. And after he does that, Shaggy Beard fakes an injury, like a back injury. He's like, "Oh, my back. Oh, we got to stop." And like basically runs off and runs away. And I wanted to know if that part too, because that in particular, and the way this whole thing ended, where the whole village kind of crowds around and like pulls her out of the cart, and the whole ridiculousness of this guy like faking the injury, and it was also over the top, but once again similar to the stuff earlier with like the crude humor and all that. This felt very real to me, like the kind of ridiculous nonsense that would happen in the 1200s, where you would read some historical account of some duel, and then like some guy fakes an injury and everybody knew he was fake. Like it just felt very real to me, and I wanted to know if any of that and all of that played out similarly to the book.
Okay.
I might. Let me preface. My guess would be no, but I want.
Yeah. So I there's a reason that I decided to answer all of these questions at once, because the ending of the book is very different from the ending of the movie. Spoilers: none of the stuff you asked about is from the book.
Okay.
So, in the book, when Birdie runs away to her Uncle George's house, the inciting incident that makes her run away is that she sees Shaggy Beard's like messengers show up, and she thinks that they've come to collect her because her mom has already had the baby at this point, and she panics and runs away. And while she's at Uncle George's house, she realizes that she can't wish herself into being a different person. All she can do is be exactly who she is and face her fate as only she can. And she writes in her diary, "And it came into my head that I cannot run away. I am whoever I am, wherever I am. Like the bear and the popinjay, I cannot survive by myself. But I also cannot survive if I am not myself. I realize that Shaggy Beard has won my body, but no matter whose wife I am, I will still be me. Mayhap I can do what I must and still be me, still survive, and please God, even thrive. I have girded my loins like a warrior from the Bible, and am going forth to do battle with the enemy. He shall not find it a comfortable prize he has won.
Okay.
So Birdie returns home, only to then discover that Shaggybeard's messengers had not come to collect his bride, but rather to report that Shaggybeard was killed in a tavern brawl, and that his son Stephen, who is described in the text as young, clean, and a lover of learning, wishes to honor the marriage contract. So Birdie, keeping in mind what she's learned, approaches this change of fortune with hope and positivity.
Okay.
Now, the end of the book has never bothered me, but I understand why it might not be for everyone. It's a little convenient, and surface level, it seems to carry this message about like sitting down and accepting your fate.
I would disagree with that, but yeah, I don't know. You're not.
Like,
That's not what
I'm
you're
not
saying.
agreeing
Yes.
with
No,
it,
I know,
but I
yes.
understand how you could read it and
Right.
get that reading
Right,
from it.
Right.
But the novel is really a character study in which we watch Birdie mature over the course of a year, and part of that maturation is realizing the ways in which she's actually able to maintain her personhood in the face of a culture that does not want her to. She can't run away and be a knight, right? She can maintain her sense of self regardless of where she goes and what she does.
I will agree that I agree. I think the movie ends similarly. Like, I think it ends on a similar note because ultimately, obviously, the whole thing with Shaggy the Beard is different. But like once the movie does wrap up, she does have a similar idea of like I have to be who I am regardless of what comes. And we see a suitor approaching in the background, so we know she is going to be married to somebody that whoever she gets chosen for.
Right.
Anyway, sorry. Continue.
And now I honestly I don't think it's a terrible message.
No.
We can't all be Joan of Arc. Most of us have to learn to work within our circumstances,
Especially in the time
in the time period.
Yeah.
Yes. Now, the ending of the movie. Do I think it's fun? Yes, I do. Does it work in context of the changes that the movie made to the story and characters, especially Rollo? Mostly. Now, here's my tangent.
Okay.
You mentioned Lena Dunham's white feminism in the prequel
thing
episode.
She is probably most critiqued for.
And my main beef with the ending of this film is that it is on full display here. So Lena Dunham obviously understands that in the Middle Ages, marriage was a financial and social strategy game, especially the higher up you were in the social strata. And we know she understands this because she specifically changes the story so that Birdie's family is depending on her advantageous marriage to save them from financial ruin.
Right.
But Lena Dunham does not seem to understand how the feminist issue intersects with the economic issues of the time period. So in the book, Karen Cushman very skillfully weaves in an explanation of feudalism into the story, so readers understand kind of how the land rent system works and how it mostly just benefits the nobility at the tippity top of the pyramid.
Right.
But this is nowhere to be found in the film. So we're told that Rollo spent up all the money, but we don't see that reflected at all within the village. And in the feudal system, if you're a peasant and the lord whose land you live and work on is poor, guess what? You're destitute.
I think
you're probably starving.
I think the movie makes one reference to this from my memory. I thought there was one. I agree that it doesn't cover it enough to make that point. I think there is one reference where and unless I misremember, I thought somebody at one point makes a reference to how because they're poor that the village hasn't been getting what it needs. I thought.
I don't remember that.
I could have swore there. I will say, I think it's like one line kind of just thrown in there and it's never really addressed again and doesn't seem to be an issue for the rest of the movie. So I agree that the movie still doesn't cover it. I do think it's just mentioned once. I thought there was like a mention of it.
Well, I think my problem with it mostly is that we're not shown any of that.
No, I agree,
mean,
yes.
even like the family apparently being poor, I feel like we don't really see.
No.
Like they say like, oh, the feasts aren't as grand, but like it looks like they're doing fine.
Yeah, everything we see with them, they seem to be doing fine. Yeah, we're just told they're poor
Yeah.
or they're struggling financially. It doesn't really seem like they
Yeah.
are necessarily. And yeah, it's not reflect. It's definitely. And again, I think the same thing. I think there's one line from one of his assistants or aides or something. I thought about how somewhere in the villagers some repairs haven't been happening or something hasn't been happening because Rollo has wasted all their money. But it almost is more of like a joke.
Yeah.
Like, he's you're not doing a good job keeping up the village, as opposed to like an actual commentary on the fact that he is financially ruined this village or whatever.
So then on top of all of that, then the ending that we get resolves the feminist issue of an unwanted arranged marriage while ignoring that by having Birdy completely avoid having to marry, they've doomed not just the family, but literally the entire village. Because you can't solve one issue while leaving the other intact. Intersectionality.
In defense of the movie slightly, it's not that she's not getting married. She is. We see a suitor coming in the background at the end of the...
we see a suitor coming.
It is. She is gonna get married. It's just she's not. He's that good. There is. Yes, we don't know how long. Yes, he is doomed the village and their people to financial destitution for another extended amount of time. But it is implied that she will be married to somebody very soon. It's just not going to be that gross guy, I guess.
Okay.
I agree the issues are still there. I'm not disagreeing. Yes.
I'm just saying, I think it's funny that the problem here kind of ends up being intersectionality.
I agree. No, yes, I agree. Because I do think the thing that is most missing from the movie is the class analysis.
Yes.
Which is in stark keeping with everything I've ever heard about Lena Dunham's material.
Yes.
Is that she is, in fact, a rich white girl from New York City or wherever she's from who has never really done much contemplation or thinking about the intersectionality of class and other issues. It's more so like, it's very focused on the feminism, the women part of oppression, and a little bit less so on every other facet of an angle of oppression in society. It's just not as pivotal to what she's doing or exploring generally. So,
but the other thing, I had this thought today. I was like, I feel like you could kind of fix this. Kind of. I mean, you could fix it by like acknowledging it more. But like the ending,
think that would be the big thing.
The ending specifically, I think you could make a change, and that would also bring it like a little bit closer in line with where the book ends. The Mitten Man. Instead of having that be the Mitten Man, she wanders outside. She gets her first kiss from this dashing young man close to her age. Doesn't know who he is. Okay. At the end of the movie, Shaggy Beard is gone. Maybe we rewrite that, maybe we don't. I don't know. And then the boy that she had her first kiss from, surprise, was actually his son, who's going to honor the marriage contract.
Yeah, that could work. That's a little fairy tale ending. Like
yes.
Yeah.
But I like it.
No, it could be fun. I will say, because I just remembered, though, I think the other thing that, and again, I agree the movie doesn't touch on this enough to the point where it's still an issue. But from my memory, one of the things Shaggy Beard says when they're running him off is, I already gave you the money. You already spent the dowry or whatever. Like, I'm pretty sure Shaggy Beard says, like, I think they may already have gotten the money for her marriage.
Right. And
they basically just steal Birdy back. And this guy's enough of a coward that they just run him out of town. And I think the bigger thing is he would probably like try to come back and or do like or bring people or whatever, blah, blah, blah. Or like try to get some allies to like whatever.
Yeah, try to seek some sort of recompense.
But I think it's possible that the movie hand waves this away by going, well, they actually got the money from him that they needed, and they were able to keep Birdie, and she's gonna marry somebody else.
Okay, well, that's also a little fairy tale.
I agree. You know, it's definitely. I agree. I agree. All the issues are still there. I think maybe like technically the movie does kind of address it. Again, this is just from my memory. I thought that I have a distinct memory of a line of him saying like, "You already took my money" or something like that, and they're like, "Ah, who cares? Fuck you," and then they take her back or something. I could have swore. So maybe that covers it slightly, but again, to your point, there's not really much analysis or discussion of it. It's just kind of like a background thing that's happening, and the movie doesn't care that much about. Which we've talked about before. Not every movie has to cover all, you know, avenues of everything. But I think it is a very interesting fact that it does seem, again, like we said, that the place where the story falls shortest is where historically the criticisms I've seen levied against Lena Dunham's writing tend to fall the shortest, which is, again, intersectionality and classism and that sort of stuff.
And it just, she made the change that made that an issue.
Yeah. And by choosing not to focus on aspects from the book that, like you said, where you talking about how it gets into kind of the nitty gritty of the feudal system and how that all works. I think the movie could have done that a little bit more, and we could have seen a little bit more of the plight of the commoner in this area and how the actions of these royals affected them. But again, that's not the focus of the story, but I think it still could have been in there a little more than the movie gave us. So
but the ending of the movie is fun, and I get why people would prefer it over the book.
I can see why some people prefer
it.
I like what you described at the book's ending. I think that makes a lot of sense. I think it works really well. And again, I think the movie kind of goes for a similar thematic ending where it's she still realizes that she's not going to have complete control over her fate, but she can kind of control how she approaches it and how she feels about it, and like fighting for the freedom she can keep and that sort of thing. The movie ends on that note, while still giving us a more like triumphant, fun, rousing, chasing off of like this gross dude. So yeah, it's fine. It's fine. All right. Let's go ahead. I had one question that Katie decided made more sense to talk about in Lost in Adaptation.
Just show me the way to get out of here, and I'll be on my way.
Where is it lost?
Yes, and I want to get unlost as soon as possible.
So I wanted to know, at one point, Birdie goes to visit George and his wife Ethelfritha on their estate. I think this is after she learns she's going to marry Shaggy Beard. And while she's visiting, she talks to George the night before, and then the next day, Ethelfritha wakes her up and takes her out to show her like their owls that they have. They're like pet owls. And they're like talking, and during this conversation, Ethelfritha is like, "We could run away together." And I was like, "Wait, what is happening?" I didn't know what to make of this scene. And so this does make more sense in Lost in Adaptation. My question was, does it happen in the book? And then 2, what?
So this does happen in the book. I think the scene plays a little better in the book, though, because we have the backstory of Ethelfritha, which is that at some point in her history, she was struck by lightning. And because of that injury, she's like not quite all there.
I bet the movie says that. I don't remember. You know, they do the little pop-ups where they show like the character bios.
Yeah, maybe they did.
I bet it says that for her, like was once struck by lightning or something.
Yeah.
Or I bet there's some allusion to that. I don't remember, but it wouldn't surprise me if there was some allusion to that.
But so in the book, we get like more examples of like kind of oddball behavior from her. Birdie once refers to her as mad as the moon.
Yeah, she doesn't seem particularly mad in the film. She seems pretty normal, other than this scene, which is very strange.
Right, and it ends up like you, I'm not really sure what the movie wants me to make of her. I guess she's just supposed to be eccentric, but this particular scene does play weird.
Yeah.
Like we both wrote the exact same note. It's just not clear what the movie wants us to make of her here.
Yeah, and this is the moment that spurs Birdie to like be like, no, I don't want to run away from my future. My people would, like my friends and family would miss me. I want to go. Like it's kind of the moment that sparks her, because she's been talking about running away this whole time, and so then this other person suggesting it kind of kicks her into realizing she shouldn't run away. But it is, I was like, but why is this the character saying Do you want to run away? It's such a strange moment. And then in particular in the movie, it made it even extra weird to me because I swear Ethelfreda gives her this look at one point while they're standing next to the owl thing. Ethelfreda looks down at her in a way that made me think that she was into her.
Yeah.
And I didn't know what to do with that. I was
it becomes a little uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine that the movie was trying
I don't
to
think
do
so
that.
either, but that's what it felt
it was
like to
odd.
me. Yeah. There felt like there was this weird tension where she was sexually into Birdie. And I was like, is that what I'm supposed to be getting out of this scene or what? Because it's just, you don't understand. Because again, the earlier conversation we've had with this character, she seems very level-headed and she completely knows what she's getting into with this marriage here and blah, blah, blah. And then all of a sudden for her to be like, we should run, me and you, a 14-year-old girl, we should run away together. I was like, wait. That kind of goes contrary to the whole speech you gave her earlier. And I guess this kind of maybe is a flaw in the movie in that you said that speech wasn't by her really. And
right.
So maybe that there's kind of conflicting characterization there in the film. But yeah, that scene, I was a little unsure of what to make of it. And I'm not sure it worked or what was going on there. So I'm glad to know I wasn't alone in that feeling. All right. Those are all of my questions. It's time to find out what Katie thought was better in the book.
You like to read?
Oh, yes. I love to read.
What do you like to read?
Everything.
Sorry, but reading in the diary format just naturally works a lot better than a voiceover over a neutral third-party viewpoint.
Yeah.
It just does.
Yeah, no, for sure. I thought the movie was fine. It
it's
didn't bother
fine,
me.
but
no,
I think there were particular points where it did not work, and it's obvious in the film that it is supposed to be a diary, and I just think that reading a diary is better than a voiceover film story of a diary.
Absolutely.
Another thing that the movie had absolutely no chance at capturing is that Birdie starts every single entry in her diary by noting which saint's day it is, and there's a little line about what that saint did and usually how they died.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you know anything about Catholic saints, but all of the stories are just patently insane.
Nuts. Yes. I don't know them, but I know enough. I've heard enough of them to know they're all fucking crazy. Yes.
A couple of my favorite ones, 28th day of January, Feast of St. John the Sage, an Irish philosopher who was stabbed to death by his students. I
feel like that is the fate, the cherished fate of any philosophy professor, to be murdered by your students. I'll have to ask Aaron Rabinowitz, but I feel like he'd be like, yeah, no, that's how I want to go.
3rd day of November, Feast of St. Rumwald, who at 3 days old said, I am a Christian, and died. And there's tons of them. They're all like this.
Right.
I didn't Google every single one, but every now and then I would look one up and fact check, and all of the ones that I looked up are real.
Yeah.
And it's amazing. There's one at one point where she denotes a saint who murdered their father, and then the first line of that entry is, I wonder how they did it.
Yeah. That we do get so her brother gives her the saint book in the movie, and she reads or she mentions one of the stories, but that's it. I think there's one point where she mentions something that happened to one of the saints or two of them, but it's not the same thing as what you're describing in the book.
Yeah, no, she does it at the beginning of every single entry, every single day, and it's the most delightful little, you know how sometimes books will have little quotes at the beginning of chapters, little epigraphs?
Yes.
It's the most delightful little variant on that.
Yeah, that is fun.
I kind of hated the music in this movie.
Yeah, I was mixed on that for sure.
I really, in particular, hated the use of the cover of My Boyfriend's Back when Uncle George is in town. again, and I wrote like I actually think I kind of hate all the music choices. Okay, maybe not all of them, but the music overall I thought was just kind of like exactly what I expected for this movie.
Yeah.
And that was a little disappointing.
I would agree. It was not my favorite. I don't know if I would have preferred just a traditional score. Maybe I don't know. Yeah, I wasn't my favorite.
Yeah. I almost think I would have preferred like bardcore covers of stuff. I don't know.
I don't know.
I don't know, but that might have been obnoxious
This
too.
is only a couple years after whatchamacallit, Bridgerton, so I don't think that
True.
would have
Yeah.
worked because that was all Bridgerton did. But I don't know. I agree though. I wasn't a huge fan of the music, but it wasn't like terrible. Like it didn't have me rolling my eyes, but it did have me being like, all right, it's fine. Like it's not.
I also thought the sound mix with the music was kind of loud. Like there were a couple points where the music came in and I was like, why is it so loud?
Yeah. That could just as easily be the home mix versus theater,
I guess so.
That kind of stuff.
There was not nearly enough recounting of being plagued by fleas in this movie. Frequently,
I think they only mentioned fleas once.
I know. Frequently throughout the book, Birdie will recount how many flea bites she has and how many fleas she killed that day. Another thing that I really loved as a 5th grader because I was a weirdo. One of Birdie's duties as a lady of the manor is to be proficient in making healing potions and salves.
Mm-hmm.
And I loved these bits of the book because she's basically just making potions out of like whatever.
Yeah.
And I loved the parts where she's like describing the ingredients for each thing because they are gross and they at least feel historically accurate. She puts like dung in a lot of stuff and like bits of bugs and like just like the grossest things you could imagine.
Mm-hmm.
And then also what it was used for. And then there's also a running gag where she's bad at it and her healing salves never work.
I think the movie includes a reference, like an Easter egg joke reference to that.
Yes.
Where
she makes Shaggy Beard a thing at one point.
Oh, does she?
Yeah, she makes him like a poultice, but she makes it out of like poop.
I don't remember that. I remember him saying, what I was thinking of, he says, oh, I have a lot of ailments and surely as a wife you have the ability to make the poultices and salves that I need or something like that. And so that felt like because he's like, surely you have the skill to make these things, and the fact that in the book she's like bad at it.
Yeah.
Does she actually make one in the movie? I don't remember that.
Yeah, because we see her like crawling around and then she brings him like a
for what?
For like when he's getting dressed and she comes in and she's like, oh, I had not planned for you to see me in my skivvies or my underthings or whatever. That was the scene with his manservant.
I remember that scene,
who kept making jokes in the background, and I hated it.
I remember that scene, but I don't remember the poultice.
Yeah, she brings him like a poultice of some sort, but I didn't know because in the movie it's kind of implied that she wasn't like actually making a healing salve. I mean, she wasn't actually making him a healing salve, but in the book, she actually does make healing salves and potions. She's just bad at it.
Gotcha.
Or maybe they don't work because it's basically just making potions out of leaves and sticks.
Yes.
But anyway, it was a fun part of the book.
Right.
I wish the movie had done more braids or like other historical styles with her hair.
Kind of just has the same hair the whole time.
Yeah, we see her have like 2 braids occasionally, but on the OG book cover, she's wearing either a hennin or a toque, which to my understanding is pretty period accurate.
Yeah.
And I get that not covering her hair emphasizes her youth to modern viewers, but I think they could have done a little bit more. Like, I think they could have done more like, oh, she has an intricate braided style, but it's very like unkempt and it's coming loose and like falling out, and like more of that kind of thing.
Yeah, for sure.
I don't recall now if the movie designated a certain year at the beginning. Like, did it say specifically?
Doesn't it say it every time
was?
there's a title card?
Does it?
Because it has like dates. I thought it had years included, but maybe I'm misremembering. Because the title cards keep popping up that says like the 5th
like All
of
Hallows
November,
Eve and
blah blah blah.
Yeah.
I thought there were years included, but maybe not. I don't
remember. But the book very specifically is set from September 1290 to September 1291.
I think they mentioned that at some point because I remember knowing it was like 1290 or like late 1200s. So they must have mentioned at some point a year.
And the book actually addresses a few real historical events, including the Edict of Expulsion, where King Edward I ordered all Jewish people to be expelled from the Kingdom of England. So early in the book, Bertie's mother provides shelter to a group of Jewish refugees who are like passing through. And Bertie is excited about this because it's 1290 and she's heard all kinds of wild things about Jews.
Spoilers, that will continue to be
Yes.
the case to current day.
But so she's really excited. She's like, oh my gosh, this is going to be great. But then when she actually interacts with these people,
They're just people.
she's surprised to discover that they're just normal people.
Yeah.
She writes in her diary, not any different from Christians. And then she writes, I think some stories are true and some stories are just stories. Now, does the book handle this element perfectly? Probably not.
Yeah.
But I appreciate that the book acknowledged how Jewish people were treated at this time. But then instead of making it like this big, like moralizing message moment, Bertie and the reader are allowed to put it together for themselves.
Yeah.
There's a moment when Uncle George first arrives back from the Crusades and he's telling her tall tales about all of the fantastic animals that he's seen in his travels, and he's describing like dragons and unicorns, and then he describes an elephant, and Bertie writes in her diary that this is obviously made up.
I mean, yeah.
No creature so ridiculous could exist.
Trunk tusks? What is this nonsense?
Tail at both ends?
No.
Ridiculous. When Bertie is jealous of George and Alice, she tries to do an anti-love spell involving graveyard dirt.
Amazing.
Like she throws graveyard dirt at them and they're both like, what? And then when they have to marry other people and they're miserable, she spends a good chunk of time like consumed with guilt that her spell worked, before realizing that matters of love and romance are just more complicated than she thought. There's a truly upsetting scene in this book involving a hanging. So near the beginning, Bertie is mad that she isn't allowed to like go over to the next town to watch a hanging.
That's in the movie,
yes,
too.
that is mentioned in the movie. But a few months later, she gets the opportunity to go to one. She's all jazzed. She's having fun. She's like, oh boy, a hanging. And then she looks up and she realizes that the big bad thieves that are going to be hanged are actually two terrified 12-year-old boys who are like crying and begging for mercy. And it is, as I said, a truly upsetting scene. And it's a major turning point for Bertie as she matures and she realizes that not everything is this fun game.
Yeah.
There's a moment, they do have the Christmas play in the book. And there's a little joke in there about how they had to switch out the girl who was going to play Mary because she's clearly no longer a virgin.
The movie just makes that joke, but has the woman be Mary still.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mentioned of Shaggy Beard's comic relief manservant in that one scene. I hated that. I hated it so much. What was even the point?
I was not a fan of that scene as well, or either. I did not like it. I think they just, I don't want to say they just wanted to get that actor in there, but that actor, do you know who that is? That's Jamie.
No.
The actor who plays that person is Jamie Demetrio. Does that name sound familiar?
No.
He's the brother of Natasha Demetrio, who is Nadja from What We Do in the Shadows. That's her brother, that actress. And he's a pretty prominent, or both of them are pretty prominent, like sketch comedians in England, like over in the UK or whatever. And he's like fairly popular. And so I think it's kind of like a fun cameo for UK audiences because I think they would know who he is. I say that it's not like he's like a huge celebrity or anything, but like, anyways, I agree. I was also not a fan of that scene. I just thought it was interesting that that's who that was. I was like, that's Nadja's brother.
Well, at any rate, I really hated that character. Yes. Just standing in the background doing commentary. I'm like, why? And then he's not in anything else. Anyway.
Yeah.
So in the book, her friend Meg, who works at the dairy, I don't know if it's mentioned in the movie that she works in the dairy.
I thought she was like a maid, like a housemaid or something.
Girl. Her name is Meg.
Yeah, I remember Meg. I thought she literally worked for like the estate and was like a servant or something.
No, so I don't remember what she is in the book in the movie. In the book, she works at the dairy. She's the dairy maid. And she gets married in the book, and Birdy does the new couple a solid by convincing her father to let the newlyweds move into Perkins' recently departed grandmother's cottage. There's this cottage sitting empty.
That's nice.
And it's nice, and it's kind of her first like attempt at getting what she wants by like working within the system. So it's kind of interesting. That scene, there's a quiet scene with Perkin in the movie. I think this is when Birdie's trying to convince him to like run away and get married with her. I think, or maybe it's later. I don't remember. But there's like a quiet scene with him where they're kind of like sitting with each other, and I felt like it was supposed to be emotional, but I also didn't think that we'd spent enough time with him to make it work quite right.
If it's a different scene, I don't know. If it's the scene where he kind of comes out to her, I thought that scene worked pretty well, if that's the scene you're talking about. Because the one where she tries to convince him to run away, that's the scene where he like comes out to her, basically. Yeah. I thought that scene worked pretty well. If there's another scene you're talking about, I don't remember that. Then I think
that probably is the scene that you're talking about.
I liked that scene. I thought it worked. I thought we knew enough of Perkin for that to work personally. Like, that scene worked for me. Like, I thought it was kind of a sweet scene, but
yeah,
I don't know.
On my last note here, I really, really hated the CGI shot of the bird flying away and then like dropping out of the sky dead.
I didn't even see that. I was literally taking a note and you said that, and then I looked up and it had already happened, and so I missed it.
So bad. It just looked so bad.
What is the point of the bird dying there?
I don't know. That's the thing, because she's letting all the birds fly free, and it's like a nice thematic moment. Yeah. I have a note about it here in a minute. But then it just like drops out of the sky dead. I don't know.
Okay. Because, yeah, that's the weird part. It's like, well, what am I supposed to get from that? Because it is like the big, like, kind of climax.
A little funny, jokey joke, I guess. I don't know.
All right. All right, that was all that Katie had for better in the book. It's time to find out what she thought was better in the movie.
My life has taught me one lesson, Hugo, and not the one I thought it would. Happy endings only happen in the movies.
So in the book, Birdie actually has 3 older brothers. We lost one of them for the movie, but that's fine because we don't need Thomas. I don't think we ever even meet him in the book. Maybe we do very briefly. But he works for the king, so he's always gone. I loved the addition of Alice's stepmother.
Yes, she was so fun.
Who simply cannot with her husband.
Yes.
I loved her.
That was the actress we were talking about from The Witcher.
Yeah. I wanted a movie about her.
She was amazing. She was so much fun.
I really liked that Birdie and Alice had their lady lessons together. Mm-hmm. That was not something
embroider and play the recorder. Yeah.
God, the recorder. Yeah, that was not something that they did together in the book, so I thought that was nice. I liked the scene where all of the monks are like hot young men.
Yes.
Thought that was funny.
And Birdie has like a coming of age moment where she's like, wait a second.
Hang on. Robert, the movie ages him down. And in general, I liked all of the changes that the movie made to Robert because he was kind of awful in the book. And they aged him down a little bit. And he was actually in the book married once before to a 12-year-old, and they weren't supposed to consummate the marriage until she was like a little older, but they did, and then she was pregnant, and then she died. And then I think we're supposed to not like Robert at the end, but like be a little bit okay with him. And I was like, I don't know if I'd be okay with that guy marrying my best friend.
Yeah.
I don't think I would be. So I was cool with losing that whole bit.
Yeah.
I liked the scene where Meg explains sex to Birdie.
Mm-hmm.
I also liked having Meg in the story a little bit more in general.
Yeah.
I thought that was a nice addition. I liked that we see that Robert does genuinely love Alice. That's kind of glossed over in the book. The movie, I thought, made a good change in how Birdie uses the silver that she gets from Shaggy Beard.
Yeah.
So in the book, they go to a midsummer fair in a larger town where Birdie sees a captive performing bear. And because the bear won't dance and therefore is not making its captor any money, he decides that he's going to do a bear baiting instead and essentially force the bear to fight some dogs to the death.
Right.
And Birdie, understandably super upset by this, and she decides to sacrifice herself and trades Shaggy Beard's silver for the bear. And then in the end, it ends up being Robert, her least favorite brother, who helps her find a home for the bear, which forces her to reconsider her bad opinion of him. Again, I don't know if I would reconsider my bad opinion of Robert, but that's neither here nor there, I guess. Now, to be clear, I do like this part of the book with the bear. It has lived rent-free in my head since the year 2000. I forgot that it was from this book, and then I was like, oh my god, the bear. But I think the movie's change in having her use the money to help Robert marry Alice ties things together a little more smoothly.
Yeah, and that being the impetus for her kind of realizing Robert isn't
isn't quite as bad.
Isn't as obnoxious as she's always thought he is when she realizes, oh, he like really cares for Alice and stuff. Yeah. I thought that was sweet.
I also liked getting to see Alice and Robert's wedding.
Yeah, that was fun.
Yeah.
A little dance scene.
Yes. And I mentioned it a minute ago, but the scene where she sets all of the birds free, they moved that to like the very end, which I thought was a nice thematic ending moment. In the book, she sets all of them free like right before she thinks she's going to have to leave to marry Shaggy Beard.
Yeah. Cool. All right, let's go ahead and talk about the handful of things that the movie nailed.
As I expected, practically perfect in every way.
The mud fight that she's in at the very beginning of the movie while they're raising a cottage, that is from the book, albeit a little bit later in the book.
Okay.
Perkin does have a limp, and he is afflicted with terrible wind.
Okay.
She does throw her spinning into the outhouse.
If in case you haven't read or
latrine.
watched Terrible Wind, he farts a lot. That's what that means.
He's got gas.
To make it clear. Sorry. Continue.
She throws her spinning into the outhouse to kind of get rid of it. She throws a bunch of stuff in there in the book.
She likes to get rid of stuff in the outhouse.
Yes. When her dad asks her, what color is your hair when it's clean? That's from the book.
Yeah.
Talks about we're giving her the Book of Saints. Uncle George tells her the truth about what the Crusades are like. She has this kind of like hyped up romantic idea of like going on the Crusades, and he's like, actually, it's just death everywhere.
Yeah.
There's a scene in particularly where she like makes herself ugly before she comes down to dinner with a suitor, and like blacks out her teeth and does all this stuff.
Yeah.
She does burn down the outhouse while a potential suitor is in it.
Yeah, that was a wild scene.
In the book, yeah.
I was like, did she murder that suitor?
No, he does manage to leave the latrine, but they do have to then build a new one. She does get to stay until the baby is born, when she's engaged to Shaggy Beard. And the priest does try to baptize the baby while it is still crowning, because they think it's not going to be born all the way.
Yeah. All right, we got a handful of odds and ends before the final verdict.
First thing I was kind of wondering in this movie was whether or not that method of feminine hygiene was anywhere close to historically accurate.
Yeah, it seemed probably, but I had no idea.
I did a very quick Google, and it seems like generally yes. Like a wad of linen.
Yeah.
Especially for a girl who would be able to easily access fabric like that.
Yeah, that makes sense. I thought casting Walder Frey / Filch, whatever that actor's name is, as Alice's dad was just a great choice. He's just he plays the most loathsome gits ever. Like he's
Yeah.
just very good at that.
The man found his niche.
Yes, he really did. Like he's so good at playing just the most awful and just, you just hate him. You're like, you're the worst.
Okay, tell me if you had the same thought here. When we first meet Alice.
Yes, I had the same thought.
And Birdie is like talking about how beautiful Alice is and all this stuff. And I
Yes.
was like, is this movie, are we going to make her sapphic?
I thought so.
I thought maybe yes.
I actually think it's still not even outside the realm of possibility that is the point, that she's not, that she is like bi or whatever.
Yeah,
like that she does
possibly
have a romantic interest in Alice a little bit.
I was a little disappointed because I felt like the movie set that up and then didn't really do anything else
Yeah.
with that.
I think it could be a fine. I agree. I think there's maybe an argument that it's like an okay, like that you don't really need to do anything with it because it's just like for
Like,
kind
I'm
of
not-
older audiences, you can kind of view it as like, yeah, that like young, not really sure, not
Right. And I'm
just
not
sort of, like,
saying that we
figuring out your
needed to do
sexuality kind of
anything
thing.
big with it. Like,
Yeah.
I don't think it needed to be a plot
right,
point.
right.
But I do think that, like, you know, we have this kind of like one instance of this and
Yeah.
then never again.
Yeah. Well, I would argue that pretty much their entire time up until Birdie starts kind of taking more interest in some boys and stuff. I think like a lot, it's not just one instance in the beginning of the movie. I think there's like a handful of scenes up until a certain point that all to me felt like the way she talks about Alice, the way they interact a little bit here and there, and like the way she looks at her. There's a handful of moments throughout that in the lead up of their relationship that to me thought I had the same thought that they were going to take it that direction. And I agree that I think maybe if anything there could have been some, maybe in the scene where like, and I don't think you need to be it doesn't need to be a big moment, but maybe in the scene where Perkin sort of, and maybe that is the moment when Perkin kind of basically comes out to her, to Birdie, if there was some sort of, maybe that would be the moment to acknowledge it in some way. I don't know. And maybe the fact that she just kind of embraces Perkin and doesn't question or say anything about it is that acknowledgement. Like maybe that scene is,
Yeah, maybe.
you could argue maybe that scene is her kind of like,
I don't know.
I don't know.
To me, it just felt like something that the movie like put in and then abandoned,
I don't
which
entirely
to me
disagree.
made it feel like a little bit cheap.
But I also, because I also went back and forth and I'm like, maybe that's what they're going for, but also maybe like reading too much
maybe
into
not.
it, because like there's like they have a very intense like friendship. Like it's not outlandish. Just you could see somebody who's not remotely queer in any way having like a very intense, or like ends up ultimately not being gay or queer or bi or whatever, having like a very intense kind of relationship with somebody of the same gender as them at a young age that doesn't ultimately lead to anything necessarily. And maybe, I don't know. I agree. It is interesting because it does feel like the movie kind of is pushing us that direction and then it just kind of doesn't go anywhere.
Yeah.
And again, not that it needs to like go anywhere specific, but it does feel like it's just
But it does feel like it just got wholly abandoned.
Yeah.
To me.
I would agree with that, I think. It wasn't a huge issue, like, and I don't think you're saying it's a huge issue, but yeah, because I did.
No, because if I thought it was a huge issue, I would have put it in one of the main sections.
Yeah.
Speaking of not huge issues, but
yeah,
what a weird random choice to have Russell Brand cameo as a suitor.
This is the same thing as having Jamie, the dude, the man.
Like that could have been literally anyone. And you went with Russell Brand. I think
Lena Dunham is just friends with Russell Brand. That seems, it strikes me as completely. I would be less surprised to learn almost anything than to learn that Lena Dunham is friends with Russell Brand.
Fair enough.
In all of his horrible, problematic, like that would surprise me zero amount. I don't know if she still would be based on where he's gone in intervening years, but that is, again, just not surprise me at all that she would, was just like, hey, I want my friend to have this cameo, like this little moment in this movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure, I
don't know. That's a straight up guess, but that would not surprise me at all.
The moment when she's on the table yelling and oinking at Shaggy Beard, and he's like, "Ooh, spicy."
Yes.
I was like, "Oh no,
gross.
oh no."
Yeah.
Blech.
My last note, and we basically already talked about this, but and I think the book's version is more realistic. But ultimately, I thought that the movie ended up like, where are the women characters in this story, kind of where their storylines wrap up and end, felt very realistic for kind of the outcomes that the women of this time period would end up with. Despite the fact that, the whole duel with Shaggy Beard and stealing him away or her away from him and all that is a little bit like, maybe a little like over the top and a little whatever. She isn't like rescued from her fate necessarily. She's rescued from her fate with this one dude, but she's still gonna have to marry the next, another suitor that comes along shortly thereafter. And I thought just in general, the movie, and I kind of mentioned earlier, is just very grounded and realistic in what outcomes were even possible for women during this time period. Like, again, it didn't feel like the book or the film tried to like sugarcoat.
It's not outlandish. It's not like something where you're watching it and you're like, well, that's nice, but that would have never happened.
Yeah. I didn't feel like that, which I thought was kind of nice and a little bit of a surprise, because I was thinking maybe, which is what we talked about, that maybe we would end up getting some very like modernized takes on on where
I was very worried about that.
On where the story would go, and I felt like it ultimately kind of stayed pretty grounded and realistic in the outcomes for these characters, which I thought was nice, which I thought was interesting. All right, before we get to the final verdict, we want to remind you can do us a giant favor by heading over to Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or Goodreads. Just give us a follow, a like, subscribe, whatever you can do on all those platforms. Interact. We'd love to hear what you have to say about Catherine Called Birdy. We will talk about it on our next prequel episode. If you could do us another favor after that, head over to Apple Podcasts, not Stitcher anymore. I think it's dead now, but Spotify, wherever you're listening to this podcast, drop us a little 5-star rating and write us a little review about what you like about the show. Helps get us out to more people. And if you really, really, really want to support us, you can head over to patreon.com/thisfilmislit. Support us there for a few bucks a month, get access to bonus content starting at the $5 a month level. You get every month we release a bonus content episode. What are we doing this month? We haven't recorded
Anastasia. We always still need to do it.
Yeah. We're going to do Anastasia, so we'll be having that come out in the next couple weeks. And then last month we did Pirates of the Caribbean, Curse of the Black Pearl. Every month we do something that we want to talk about and just kind of do a little bonus episode. You get that at the $5 level. At the $15 and up level, if you have something you would really like for us to talk about, give us that $15 a month, stick around for a little bit and recommend it, and we will put it into our schedule as soon as we can get it in there. Katie, it's time for the final verdict.
Now, are you ready for your sentence?
Sentence? But there must be a verdict first.
Sentence first, verdict afterwards.
Said a lot during this episode, so I'll try to keep things a little short and sweet here. I mentioned briefly in the prequel episode that this book came out during a period of time when a lot of middle grade fiction marketed to girls was realistic historical fiction featuring plucky young heroines, something I refer to as historical girl power. To give a few examples, American Girl, Dear America, The Royal Diaries, etc. Now, I can't speak to what exactly kicked off this trend, but I think what made it so popular, at least among us nerdy little weirdos, was its willingness to be honest and unflinching about what life was actually like for women and girls at different points in history. Its willingness to not just acknowledge, but to fully explore the bad parts. Catherine Called Birdy is no exception to that. And I think that's why I prefer the arguably anticlimactic ending of the book. It feels real, whereas the movies feels a little coated in the veneer of 21st century girl power, which can be fun and inspiring, but more often than not skims over the realities of what it truly is to be a girl. And I think that's my issue with the movie in general. While there were a lot of changes that in other instances might result in my preferring the film, in this case, the movie ended up feeling a little superficial, a bit of a cry from the subtle, character-driven story of the book. Add on top of that the book's truly unique voice of its narrator, coupled with a humor that I just realized this week was very influential on my own sense of humor, and you have something that feels unique in a way that the movie just can't capture. I understand why someone might prefer the movie for its changes, but for its grit and glorious embrace of the unpleasant, I have to give this one to the book.
All right, Katie, what's next?
Up next, we are staying in the realm of historical fiction, but we are moving quite a bit forward in time.
But we're also staying with weird titles.
Yes, we are talking about the Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society.
We're in our weird title arc. Weird title era.
A little bit, yeah.
I mean, this one's even weirder than
yes.
Catherine Called Birdy.
And long.
Yes.
I hope I pronounced Guernsey correctly.
Probably not. It's
don't
British,
know
right?
if I did. Yeah.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, it's a World War II historical fiction.
Sweet. Sounds interesting. We will check that out in 2 weeks' time. But in 1 week's time, we're seeing what you all had to say about Catherine Called Birdy, as well as previewing the Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society. Until that time, guys, gals, non-binary pals, and everybody else,
Keep reading books.
keep watching movies.
And keep being awesome.